Hey everybody, we are live here, ChristianRecovery.Network. We got Buck and Jeff and myself and Jay, and we are here to talk about leadership. We're going to talk about leadership in recovery, and but I'd love to have our guest, Buck. Would you introduce yourself? Let us know a little bit about yourself.
I would love to. My name is Buck Francis. I am a grateful believer in Christ, struggling with addiction, codependency, and depression.
Hey, Buck.
I have been in recovery for about 20 years,
Wow.
and of that 20 years, about 11 of that have been in Celebrate Recovery, and I have
Awesome.
been in leadership for most of that time in Celebrate Recovery, and so I've been kind of trying to learn the 12 steps, be a student of relationships and ministry, and learn and grow.
That's it. And you're a student of recovery for yourself first. That's what we were
That's
talking
right.
about as we were
Yeah.
kind of getting ready for this podcast, is that it's for us first before it's for anybody
Mm-hmm.
else. Jeffrey,
That's right.
what's going on? Tell us a little bit about what's happened in your world.
I was just thinking about the subject, and that's exactly right, man. If I don't have it, I can't give it to those that serve with me, or so the recovery in my life, over the last year, I just really have been focused on the fact that sobriety is just such a little bitty piece of recovery, and recovery in my life, just takes on so many forms, man. I need it so badly on a daily basis, and so as a leader, reminding, we were just talking about it, you actually shared a message at the Recovery Alive kickoff at Aaron Lake Baptist Church a couple weeks ago.
That was an awesome night, by the way.
It was an amazing night, man. It was one of the most powerful messages I've ever heard. I mean, I shared that, and it was the truth because of the way you framed things. And it brought me to the altar. It brought me to the altar because I realized, that I was wearing myself out as a leader and that I needed to find some rest. But where do I find that rest as a leader, man? And I find that rest in Jesus Christ, and I plug into that rest through the recovery process. So I realized that as a leader, I was so busy about ministry that I wasn't working my recovery like I used to. And so it helped me to open my eyes and realize, man, I need to get back to where I've been. I need to get back to seek and recovery with all I got. And, recovery is just another word for seeking the plan that God has for my life, right? I mean, because recovery says we're getting something back, and so yeah, I thank you for that message. I think, the whole recovery, Christ in a recovery community, man, that allows me to be lacking, and to recognize that and to come back. I appreciate those that I serve with and those that look to me for leadership, for allowing me to be less than perfect, in my recovery, man, and for but I thank God for helping me to see those places and so that I can learn to go after it.
Yeah. I'll tell you, man, I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but kind of jumping right into this is when I was up there having that conversation with the Recovery Live crowd, which is a mix of folks, newcomers, folks who've been coming there maybe for a few weeks, months, and then leaders. I have this sense, and it happens now more and more, and I don't know if it's a calling thing. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes your calling changes a little bit, but I'm up on stage and I'm talking to this mix of folks, and it feels like the heaviest people in the crowd, the folks who are bearing the most pain and weight, aren't the newcomers, but the leaders. That's what I felt. I'm at the end of this message and I'm thinking, what's the altar call? What's the message? And I'm telling you, I've been traveling a lot, going to a lot of, I went to a Celebrate Recovery anniversary and shared, went to another Recovery Live launch and went to Aaron Lake. And I spoke at a church function a couple of weeks ago in Greensboro. And what I've been just feeling, and I don't know if it's just the Holy Spirit redirecting and refocusing some of the messages that I'm sharing, but the people that I'm zeroing in on that altar call go like, these folks need a touch from God is, of course, everybody in the crowd, but specifically leadership, because leaders are broken and they don't talk about it.
Right.
Leaders are addicted and they don't talk about it. Leaders are burnt out and they don't feel like they can talk about it because that would make them look weak. They've got to be strong for everybody else. They've got to manage what's happening. They got to manage themselves. If anybody thinks I'm struggling, then I'm going to lose my authenticity, and my people are going to wonder about my leadership. And I really am starting to see it's the opposite. Buck, you're talking about this, but we were having some good conversation before this. It's vulnerability, I think, that draws people to us and makes folks say that's the real deal. Is that what you've experienced, Buck?
It is, and one of those examples is, as a leader, sometimes I did things out of codependency and wanting to pick things up for other people, and I got a lot of pats on the back. I got a lot of praise. I got a lot of attaboys, if you will, and a lot of validation. But
you're chasing that, right? You're chasing.
I was chasing that, and I think that in my leadership, my heart, my motive was good. I wanted to serve God. I wanted to help people. I feel called into recovery ministry, and I thought, well, what better way than to rise up as high as I can in leadership? Well, what I found was I was spending more time on all the administrative things and the leadership aspect of it than I was on that one-to-one connection with people. And one of the things that I've learned, I recently stepped down as a state rep and team lead for Oklahoma. And when I started being vulnerable from the podium about why I was doing this and why I needed to give myself a reset in ministry, I had several people give me the feedback that, man, what you're doing right now is actually having more of an impact on me than what you were doing before. Because you're opening up and you're being honest about the fact that you struggle with codependency, you struggle with depression, you struggle with people pleasing, and you've made yourself this, you've got this laundry list of things that you have to do now. And so being vulnerable about being in that space and having to go, I need to step back. I need a break. I need to take care of my family and my recovery. That was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do.
Why is it hard? Why do you?
Cool. I was just going to say, getting out of that routine, I think we can get in a routine of doing that, and I think about it like with the gym, if you just do the same exercise every day, for years, then it quits making a difference, and so that's the thing. We have to break out of that routine of what we're doing in our recoveries, or as leaders, because sometimes the routine becomes being a leader and not working our recovery or seriously.
That's the question: is why do we get stuck in these routines, and why is it so? It's a two-part question for both of you guys. Jay weigh in on this too. Like, why do you think that it is so difficult to break out a routine? Why is it so difficult to let go in leadership?
I think for me that this year, what I realized was I didn't want to lose momentum. I thought, okay, I'm building this Facebook presence, this social media presence. I'm doing these events, and I'm getting involved in these missions and stuff like that, and I'm trying to bring a team together, and I'm trying to bring a state together.
And it's all on you. It's all on you. You're doing it, right?
Right. And there's, a few people that are like, oh, this is awesome. We need this. And then it's like, okay, but where everybody else can do this. I was trying to spread the hope and the healing and the mission. But then when it came time to do the work, like there were a lot of people that wanted to help and would, but ultimately I felt like the pressure was on me. And I didn't feel like, I knew I could add, it's what's so hard. And this is a me thing. This has nothing to do with anybody else. Like nobody around me is doing anything wrong, but it was on me. If that person's sick, well, I'll step in and do it. Or if that person can't be at that meeting, I'll step in and do it. Well, if that person can't teach that night, I'll do it. And it was just like that aspect of codependent people pleasing. I didn't want to break that momentum. I didn't want to let anybody down. Like,
Right.
and that for me, that's the heart of it right there, is I don't want to let people down. And even right now, that's what I'm having to work my recovery with, because stepping down from leadership means there might be a hole. And it's so hard for me, especially at the local level with my church, because if we step down, I know God's going to do what he's going to do, but that might mean that there's not a CR there anymore.
Well, that's the question, Buck. Do we believe that God is going to do what God is going to do?
Yeah.
Like, he raised us up. Why can't you just raise somebody else up?
I think inadvertently, by not being willing to do that, we're letting people down.
Right.
You know, so, you know, we need to lead with a lamp, right? I mean, we need to lead authentically. And if we're going to lead authentically, then those areas that we need to work on, man, we need to show others that it's okay. It's okay to drop back. It's okay to step out and work on what we need to work on, so that we can ultimately be more effective.
And letting people know, I love what you said, is like, by doing that, we're actually letting people down, and we're also not allowing people to step up who possibly could, or, you know, I love Andy Stanley. He says, you know, don't work on your weaknesses, delegate your weakness, because your weakness might be someone else's strength. And I think it's a good segue into, I wanted to just read a little snippet from a book that I've been looking at. It's called Leading with a Limp. Fella from a school of ministry wrote this some time ago, and there's a lot of wisdom in this. Leading with a Limp. That's actually, I think, what we'll end up titling this podcast. But it's that thing that we face initially when we are working on our recovery, and that is, I'm powerless, realizing I'm powerless, and that my life is unmanageable, getting to a place where I'll admit that. And Buck, you've written a blog, and it's going to be available on ChristianRecovery.Network. Check out his blog. It's on blind spots, leadership blind spots. How we get to a place where our blind spots get larger is that I think we revert back to a place where we have to control, that we feel afraid to let go of control. Buck, you talking about this fear of like, I've built this thing, and I know you're a humble dude, but like the pressure of like, I've built this, I've created this momentum, and if I stop, the momentum will cease. And I was thinking about Galatians 3, the beginning of Galatians 3, where Paul says, "You foolish Galatians, what has bewitched you? Before your eyes Christ was clearly portrayed as crucified. Are you so foolish? After beginning by means of the Spirit, are you returning to the works of the law? Do you receive the Spirit by works of the law, or by believing what you heard? Are you trying to finish," he says, "by the flesh?" And so, like, saying, hey, it's been God from the start. He's the one who saved me. He's the one who called me. He's the one who is working in me to do and act according to his good work. So I wanted to just read a little snippet out of this, where leadership, and if anybody's watching and you're working through a process of being burnt out, or you feel lonely in leadership, or you're overwhelmed in leadership, you feel like everything is on you, you feel like this sense like, I can't let anything go, I want you to check this book out. It's been extremely helpful. I'm just going to read a little snippet of it, and I'd love you guys to respond to this. This portion of the book is on the controlling leader. And I just hope all of us, myself included, it's really challenged me. I never thought of myself as a controlling leader, but I see some pieces here that there's times where I'm like, who knew it? I can micromanage a little bit. So
I knew.
Yeah. So his name is Dan Allender, and he says, a controlling leader always gets what he deserves, the bare minimum, and conformity without creativity. So a leader whose power comes from control invariably uses his authority to punish failure. The idea being like, you cannot fail. As a leader, you can't fail, and you don't let the people who are working with you fail. People don't feel like they can fail because you're just so interested in results that you don't allow creativity to happen. He goes on to say the controlling leader must eventually, he or she has to become a micromanager. He says the devil in this case is truly in the details. A controlling leader doesn't trust his or her staff to do what needs to be done. Therefore, he or she must dip deeper into the minutia of the crisis. The more detail-oriented we become, the more compulsive our actions, narrower our views of the problem. We can't work outside the box about problems, and we'll get lost in the forest, not see the path, not to mention the trees. It's the last thing he says. What drives a controlling leader? Inevitably, it is a fear and the pursuit of power. The more control a person gains over personnel and problems, the greater the sense of safety. I have felt in my life, and some people who come into recovery, I have felt that chaos feels unsafe. So I want to manage and control, right? If some of you, I don't know where, Buck, your background, I don't think I've heard your testimony. But like, if you've had a background of insanity, chaos, abuse, control, managing those things feels safe, right? And so, I'd love for you guys to just kind of respond to this idea of like letting go of control in leadership. How difficult is that for you, Buck? I know that that's something you're working through right now.
It is. And I think that, when I really go back, I like what you said about when you have a history of that. It's like I didn't have control over the things that happened to me as a kid. I didn't have, and so when I became older, I pursued, and it was almost like an all or nothing type situation where if I didn't feel like I could do something to the max, I didn't do it. Mm-hmm. If I went into an educational pursuit, I went into it with my whole being, and I became a CPA, and I don't even like accounting. I'm a CPA. I'm a CFO for a small company, and my tendency is to go, okay, how do we get everything figured out so that we have a system, so that we have explanations for everything, documentation for everything. And I think that there's a good time and a place for all of that, but there's also a time and a place where I need to just step back and take a minute to just let things be and not try to fix them right away. And that's hard for me because one of my first things when I get a problem presented to me in ministry or work or anywhere else is pull up a spreadsheet. What do we got to do? What do we have to organize? And I'm really good at organizing, and I'm really good at thinking through all the details. But like you said, it's like I can get so wrapped up in the planning and the processes that I forget about what I really need to think about. And
it disrupts creativity.
Right.
It disrupts the ability to, I hate it's sort of a cheesy statement, but like think outside the box, allowing other people to come in and present ideas without criticizing. That won't work. Like immediately shutting it down, or feeling like if somebody says what you're doing, like who can tell any of us right now what you're doing isn't working? Who can tell us that? And if you're a controlling leader, that starts to, you can be offended. People don't feel like they can come and tell you anything. And then pretty soon you just have a bunch of yes men. All you're doing is hanging out with the choir, and they're going, hey, we love what you're doing, because they don't want to get in trouble.
John, I remember years ago serving under you as a state rep, and you were a regional director. And I remember being at a retreat one year, and you told us, you gave us permission to fail. And I'll always remember that. That sticks out in my mind over the years, man, because that's, and I try to share that with the leaders that serve under me, because when you said that, it really opened my mind to the idea that I could try things, that I could try new things, and that that illusion of control I have, over I need to allow them that same freedom. There's freedom in that, right? There's freedom in that. And we can never innovate anything if we're not willing to fail. And so as leaders, when we get stuck in this illusion of control, and then things don't change. Things don't move forward. We get stuck in that routine because what's working now is working, or I think it's working. Right. And so it's the illusion of control.
Well, it has to work. It has to be working for our hubris, our ego, to be able to get that pat on the back. If Buck, what you're saying is so good, is like, if I've worked to get that pat on the back, then the reward for leadership is no longer about results, like people getting saved, more people coming to your recovery ministry. What is the reward?
That pat on
and so back. All you do is you set up a system. As a leader, I'm setting up a system to get as many pats on my back as possible, and you lose the bullseye. Does that make sense? Like, I'm going to lose the bullseye, which is save lives, and all of a sudden it begins to shift to going like, I have to make sure that everybody thinks I'm doing a good job, and if anybody tells me I'm not doing a good job, out they go, because it hits my ego. So it goes back to that step one. I got to be able to have somebody watching for my blind spots and be able to, like the David Nathan. You are that man, says Nathan to David after he screws up with Bathsheba and kills her husband. You have to have a Nathan in your life. Don't you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I think that comes from taking care of ourselves and being in recovery ourselves, because if I'm so busy that I don't have time for relationships, then those people don't have the freedom and permission to speak into my life. And I've got a couple of those, but it's like those people change over time. I think that there's a few people that are lasting, but what I've noticed is that if I just get so busy, I don't have time for morning breakfast with the guys because I've got this meeting and that meeting and this and that.
Yeah.
Then I lose that intimacy that it takes for someone to actually speak into my life. And so, I think it's absolutely critical that we have
maybe some warning signs, as we kind of move into kind of our last part of this podcast. If we said, what are some warning signs that you're becoming a controlling leader? What's some warning signs that you're not able to see your own blind spots? What would be some warning signs of saying, hey, I think I'm becoming a controlling leader? My ego is sort of taking over. And ego sounds like, I'm super prideful and arrogant. That's not the point. It's that it's all about me. I think, Jeff, you said when you went to the altar recently and you had that moment where, I had shared, if you're struggling as a leader and you're just tired and burnt out, and you went and said, I realized that I just want to make sure I'm quoting this right from you, Jeff, is that you were realizing that when you were really struggling and burnt out, you would go to the recliner. And you would just take it. You'd say, I need some me time. I need some self. I need myself to comfort myself. And you realized that had become your source of comfort. Can you just speak on that really quick?
That's right. And I think, and I was listening to Buck, and self-care is important, man. And that's the thing. But that time in the recliner was not self-care. That's what I use as an excuse. It doesn't really get me anywhere. It doesn't do
good distinctive
for me. The self-care comes with those, like Buck said, making time to meet with those people. I mean, God has really worked on me about people He's brought back into my life recently, and making time to spend with them. If He brought them into my life, there was a reason for that. And if I never have time for them, then I'm not accomplishing God's goal in my life. So when I say that I need to be busier, I don't mean busier for busy's sake. I need to be busier about seeking God for my life and His will for my life. And that comes from letting go of that illusion of control and opening myself up to the fact that that I need help.
I like what you said. Your words were, I need to rest in Christ, not in my recliner. I love that. That's a t-shirt, right? But I think because I think all three of us, I struggle with alcohol, you guys struggled with addiction, is that our denial can get us to such a place of justification where we could literally call a relapse self-care, couldn't we? Like we could call, like, this is self-care. Me going and taking care of my needs is self-care, but sometimes that can be called a relapse. And so let's look at, like, what are some signs? And Jay, man, I know you do some leadership, involved leadership. Like, what would you say are some signs? Jeff, what do you think is one sign, like, hey, you're becoming a controlling leader? What's a red flag? What's a warning sign that you'd say, hey, if this is going on, you might want to get yourself to a recovery meeting, find somebody to talk to, and do a checkup? What would you say would be one big red flag?
Well, I mean, the obvious big red flag is the need to be in control of everything going on in the ministry or the organization, or being able to, the need,
like micromanaging and grabbing all the minutia, not being able to
just perfect. The need to and to not be willing to accept anything less than that. I mean, it can really,
catching yourself at being controlling and trying to micromanage everything would be a red flag. Buck, what would you say is a red flag? If you're like, hey, if you're a leader and you got this going on, you may want to do a checkup, call your sponsor, talk to somebody.
I totally agree with Jeff, and that's one of the things I struggle with. But for me, I think what I learned this year, just in a very personal way, was you guys have heard the illustration of the rocks in the jar, where you have to put the big rocks in the jar before you can get the little rocks in the jar.
That's
Otherwise,
right. Yeah.
You can't get the big ones in. Well, those big rocks are my faith, my time with God, my discipleship of myself and others, and then my personal, like, fitness, my emotional, spiritual, and physical fitness, and then my time with my family. How's the discipleship of my family going? And what I realized was that I was saying no to my family in order to say yes to the process of leadership or the ministry itself, and I was busting boundaries that I should have set. And so for me, that I am trying to recreate healthy boundaries so that my next step, my next assignment, whatever God takes me, I will be a healthy leader. And that for me was the big sign. The big red flag was when I wasn't present with my kids, when I was home but I wasn't quite home, when I had 3 or 4 meetings a week going on, and they weren't recovery meetings. They were me leading into something. It wasn't me going to recovery or doing a step study or a process group. It was me leading a meeting or leading a group. And I wasn't taking care of those big rocks. And
I love that illustration. Yeah, I love that illustration of these large, if you kind of pour those little pebbles into a jar, like a glass jar, and then you try to stuff the big rocks in, they won't fit. But you put the big rocks in first and then sprinkle that, it kind of fills in all those gaps. And I think I forgot about that, and I'm going to use it, Buck. That is a great leadership illustration, is make sure those big rocks go in first. That is fantastic.
Yeah. And I think for me, it had to be willing to listen to my wife, and her being willing to say what she needed to say, because
leading at home is listening to people. Good.
Right. Leading at home, because what I was preaching, God first, family, then everything else. And one night she was like, Buck, you're saying it, but you're not doing it. And there's some things that I'm struggling with here. I'm feeling alone here, and I need your help.
Yeah.
And it was like, all of a sudden I realized, okay, something's wrong here. If my wife doesn't want to get on board with what I want to do in leadership, that's a big red flag.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and so
That's
we
good.
both had to take this step back and go, what do we really need to do here? What are we doing with our kids? What are we doing with one another? And where do we need to get with God?
And, I'd like to chime in and just say one of the things that has really helped me recently is, we here locally, I've partnered with the community paramedic program, and I've been serving more instead of leading more. So I've been out at community events with a table, handing out serenity rags, asking people if I could pray for them, giving bags we put together for the homeless. And it doesn't have to be my event. See, in the past, it always had to be my event, and then I would invite people. But serving at other people's events, and just has helped me in a lot of ways. In this leadership thing, to realize that I need to always be a servant leader.
That's good.
And then I can find those places, that are fulfilling, they're chasing after God. I mean, that's what Jesus said, right? I came not to, and because I didn't come to be the leader, I came to serve, right?
That's right.
To paraphrase.
And that's what leadership is, servant leadership, right?
Right.
Absolutely. Jay, any red flags?
Well, as I think about what this conversation is entailing, everything you guys are saying is incredibly beautiful. Really, when I think about leadership, and my personal leadership in the church as an executive pastor, just all the different things. One thing I have found helpful is looking around and kind of doing a risk assessment, because one thing I've learned about life and my own discipleship, is that everything in life that is worth something is risky. It seems like everything that God has ever asked me to do is risky. And if there's nothing in my life that is presenting riskiness, I have to step back and ask myself, what's going on? Have I produced an environment that is so controlled
That's good.
that it's no longer breathing, it's no longer living, it's no longer alive, there's no risk involved? I would say if you find yourself in that situation, you might want to take a step back and ask yourself, are you really willing to be vulnerable enough to take risks? Are there any things in your life?
I like risk assessment because, in most the corporate world, risk assessment is like, where are some areas where something really bad could happen that you try to control. Right. But maybe in Christian leadership, we do a risk assessment. We ask, what are you doing that requires faith in your life? Is there anything that you're doing right now that you say, I can't figure this out, but I'm going to step out in faith? So I love the idea of a flip-flop. Maybe that'd be another podcast, like doing a risk assessment, of your leadership. Like, what are you doing that requires audacious faith? I can't do this. I'm totally counting on God. Here's my red flag. If you are in leadership and you find yourself defensive a lot, you find yourself in conversations feeling defensive, it's a good time to do some self-evaluation. If people, leadership, everybody, you start to, you know what I mean by defensive. Everybody is offending you. You feel like you're being attacked by everybody. It's a good time to go, maybe I'm not in a good place to receive feedback. Maybe I'm struggling with some wounds in my life where I feel like everybody's attacking me, but really maybe I'm not a very good listener. Maybe I need to listen to my staff. Maybe I need to back up and let them do an assessment of our entire ministry. But if you're feeling defensive all the time, there's probably some wounds being touched there. You might have sunburned if everybody who touches you on the back makes you cry out in pain, right? And so really doing some recovery work, going back to step one. Jeff has kept mentioning it over and over. Control is an illusion. It is not, we are powerless. What we manage is our response. That's what we're in charge of, is the way that we respond, our attitude, serenity, prayer, the basics. But sometimes we just forget the basics. Yeah. So I appreciate you guys so much. Like, if you're in leadership, you're lonely, you're struggling, you're burnt out, you're overwhelmed, you're defensive, you're not taking risks, you're not allowing your people to take risks, you're not asking for input, nobody can tell you you're wrong. Get into a group, get into a step study, get into a process group, call your sponsor. If you don't have a sponsor, you're in trouble. If you're lonely in leadership, you're in trouble. So it's lonely at the top. It doesn't need to be. Accountability. Get yourself into a disciple. Jeff, you said you're getting into a discipleship group. Getting yourself into, getting yourself into situations where you're learning, that you're growing, that you're willing to say, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. That's
right.
What leadership is about. It's this ability, like is shared in this book, to lead with a limp and to show your weakness. Be vulnerable, be open, be humble. And the scripture I'm really leaning into, Paul is talking to Timothy in 1 Timothy, and he says, here is a trustworthy saying that is deserving of full acceptance. Jesus Christ came to save sinners, ready? Of who I am the worst. Mm-hmm. But he chose that process, Paul says to Timothy. He chose the process of choosing weak leadership to show his patience, his power, his mercy, and his goodness through all of us crackpots. And this is a bunch of crackpots right here in this group, I promise you, who God is using for his glory and his power. Buck, thank you for hanging out with us, man. We're praying for your process. Congratulations on the courage. We congratulate people for stepping up in leadership. Congratulations on your courage sort of to step down in leadership and step up in your family. Jeffrey, I love you, man. Thank you.
Yeah. Love
Any
all
last
you guys.
words?
Thanks for hanging out today.
What do you got, Jeff? Close us out.
Do what?
Close us out. Give us some last words of wisdom. You are by far the oldest person here, like by far. Close us out with some words of wisdom. What would you tell a leader who's burned out? What would you tell them to do?
So I say, don't be afraid to admit. Don't be afraid to admit your weaknesses. Don't be afraid to admit your faults. The truth is, if you have the right people around you, it doesn't matter. They will see the strength in that. And if you have the wrong people around you, well, then you might need to reconsider that because in Christianity, in godly leadership, man, leading with a limp, as the book is entitled, and John recommended me that book to me, and I've read it. It was just an amazing insight. But being able to lead from a place of vulnerability, from realism, from authenticity, man, is the only Christian way to lead.
That's it.
I love you guys, man. I appreciate your prayers for me. I'll be praying for you, man. And let's get back to the basics, man. Let's go after more of God and less of self.
Yeah, we love you guys. We're so grateful for you. Buck is part of the Christian Recovery Network. Thanks for joining us on the network, buddy. We appreciate your ministry.
That's awesome.
If you want to get involved with Christian Recovery Network and be a part of the largest Christian recovery network in the world, get yourself connected to us, man. It doesn't matter if you're a counselor, doesn't matter if you're a psychiatrist, a church, a recovery program, plug in. It's less than, it's going to be like, what, $7-8 a month to get plugged into the ChristianRecovery.Network. Join this network, grow this network, support this network. We love you guys. God bless you, and thanks for hanging out on the podcast. Thanks, Buck.
Thank you, guys. Love you.